So thanks again to everyone for coming out here today. My name is Wayne. I am a lawyer, recovering law professor, and co-founding organizer for the Animal Rights Network Direct Action Everywhere, or DXE. Our mission at Direct Action Everywhere is to create empowered networks of animal rights activism. We use the latest technology and most innovative research to accomplish this mission. And in our flagship campaign, which we call It's Not Food, It's Violence, we have now mobilized 60 cities in 17 different countries. But before I was a lawyer, recovering law professor, and activist, I was a social scientist. I studied behavioral economics at MIT. I worked with pioneering scholars such as Harvard's Cass Sunstein in trying to unravel the mystery of human social behavior. And what I learned as a social scientist completely upended my views on social change. I'm here today to share some of those insights. The question for the day is on the slide. What if everything we think we know about social change is wrong? What if everything we've been taught as progressive activists is based on bad models and theories? What if progressive movements in the United States have fallen into a ditch? Why should we ask these questions? Well, because we know that movements across the world have had incredible success and astonishing mobilizations. Let's look at some examples. LGBTQ rights. Just a generation ago, being gay was criminalized in this country. Today, the Gay Pride Parade is one of the largest celebrations in the world. The idea of LGBTQ liberation, while still unrealized, has reached the farthest corners of this planet, including this demonstration in Moscow. The Arab Spring. One man in Tunisia, Mohamed Bouazizi, lit himself on fire to protest tyranny in his country in December of 2010. But the fire that he lit spread across the entire Middle East. It has now upended the politics of 17 different countries. It has toppled dictatorships that we once thought were completely unbreakable. And perhaps most important, it has inspired tens of thousands of people to stream out into the streets to speak out for social justice, when for nearly a century they had been trapped in a conspiracy of silence. Finally, animal rights. While most countries across the world are plugging around at 1% to 2% of the population, a handful of countries has seen astonishing progress in the span of a year or less. These countries have seen growth in the vegetarian population by 15% or more. Animal rights is in the daily news. At a single day of action that DXE helped to organize, the Earthlings Coalition March in August 2013, some of these countries had thousands of people mobilized in the streets, more than the entire United States combined. So when we see these movements having such astonishing success, and we compare them to the relative calm in the United States, I think we have to ask ourselves, what is it that these movements are doing right? And what is it that we might be doing wrong? I'm going to spend about 20 minutes talking about a model for social change. Then my co-organizer will talk about how DXE has tried to apply that model to the cause of animal rights. Then we'll show a short 5-minute video which demonstrates our model of activism in action. But to give you a preview, here is our astonishing simple formula for social change. Create, connect, inspire. First, we have to create activists. Not passive supporters, not vegan consumers, but activists. Second, we have to connect those activists in broader networks for change. Third, we have to inspire and empower those networks of activists to take collective action for social justice. In short, our mission is to create and light up an entire network of ordinary people willing to speak strongly for social justice. But before we move on, I want to tell you a personal story that helps illuminate the problem of social justice and social change. I call it the 1% to 2% story because it's based on a commonly cited statistic in animal advocacy. Namely that 1% to 2% of the people we reach with friendly behavioral change and information about animal rights will be converted to our cause. When I first heard this statistic as an economics student at the University of Chicago, I accepted it without question. After all, this model of change had worked on me. Someone had given me some information, I read Animal Liberation, watched me eat meat, and I became a vegan as a result. I figured it would work on the rest of the world, so I set out to do just that. Over a 3-year period at the University of Chicago, we baked vegan cookies. I actually personally baked almost every single one. And handed them out to anyone who would watch the animal rights short, Meet Your Meat. We also leafleted at least twice a week with the vegetarian and vegan leaflets. Over that 3-year period, over 15,000 people watched Meet Your Meat. Over 24,000 people received a vegetarian or vegan leaflet. By the 1% to 2% story, there should have been hundreds more vegetarians on campus. But a funny thing happened. When we sent an email follow-up to all these folks we thought had converted to vegetarianism and veganism, the expected vegan testimonials simply didn't come in. Instead, we got dead silence. Even more alarmingly, over that same 3-year period, participation in the University of Chicago Vegan Society declined precipitously. All that outreach, all those leaflets, and all those cookies, and nothing seemed to be working at all. I want to suggest today that what was true for me at the University of Chicago in the early 2000s is true for progressive movements more generally. After all, just a single, relatively small animal rights organization has handed out 16 million leaflets in 20 years. Another animal rights organization has had 42 million people watch its videos in the past 5 years. Collectively, the animal rights movement has exposed hundreds of millions of people to our friendly attempts at behavioral change. And yet the movement is stuck in the same place. The Vegetarian Resource Group, for example, shows that the vegetarian population, the self-reported vegetarian population, has declined from 5% in 2011 to 4% in 2012. If our efforts were working, if the 1% to 2% story were actually true, there would be millions more vegans than there actually are. So where are all these missing vegans? To answer that question, I think we have to challenge some of our most basic assumptions about social change. I had accepted the 1% to 2% story instead of questioning it. I believed in naive statistics and false claims of certainty that I never would have accepted as a social scientist. I needed to start questioning some of my basic assumptions about social change, and we're here today to question them together. Let's look at 3 assumptions. First, that our focus on as activists is to change individuals. Second, that we should be focused on changing behavior rather than beliefs or social norms. Third, that we always have to play nice. The question I want to ask all of you today is, what if none of these matter at all? So let's look at the first one. We're often told as progressive activists that our focus should be this guy. And we need to change individuals and individual consumers especially one at a time in order to solve the broader problem of social change. We're told that progress happens slowly, one person at a time. Therefore, we have to look at individual choices, desires, and preferences to solve the collective problems that are so urgent. Progressive activism, in short, becomes a consumer marketing problem. We're doing the same exact thing that McDonald's, Burger King, and Coca-Cola are doing, just with a different message, right? Wonderful story. There's just one problem. It's wrong. And this is the man who showed us why. Duncan Watts is one of a new breed of mathematical sociologists. He started out as a physicist studying what physicists call small world problems, and his research has now been extended over the past 15 years into social networks as well. His work, which has been published in Science, Nature, and other top scientific journals, has been used to illustrate and illuminate everything from the neural network of the brain to the engineering of a power grid. And what Duncan and other network scientists have found over and over again is that in certain complex systems, individual components often don't matter at all. What matters is the structure of the network and the interaction between many components in driving systemic change. So what do we mean by this? Well, if we're trying to understand social change, we can look at least 3 different perspectives. First is we can look at individual brain cells, neurons. The brain, after all, comprises human choices, right? And neurons comprise the brain. So why don't we look at individual neurons and trying to solve the problem of social change? Now, any neuroscientist will tell you this is absolutely crazy. Why? Because what dictates the brain and consciousness and emotion and decision-making is not an individual neuron, it's the interaction between billions of neurons, in fact 100 billion neurons, in determining human consciousness. So if we're not going to look at neurons, maybe we should look at individual people. This is a natural perspective to take because we experience the world as individuals. In fact, we don't even consider that there might be another perspective worth analyzing. But there is another perspective, and that is the perspective of the social network. And what Duncan Watts and other social scientists have found in a series of brilliant and innovative experiments and simulations is that when it comes to human social change, the attributes and desires of each individual often don't matter at all. What matters instead is the structure of the entire network, and the elements of that structure, the interaction between billions of people in determining the course of social change. So one of Duncan Watts' most fascinating experiments involved this guy, Justin Bieber. He asked the question, why the hell do we listen to Justin Bieber anyways? Is it the quality of the music? Hopefully we can discredit this hypothesis. No one's going to vote for this answer. Thank you. No votes for Justin Bieber. Okay, good. Is it the quality of the marketing? Maybe the publishing companies are just really good at sticking tendrils into our brain and forcing us to listen to music that's actually really crap. Or maybe it's something else. Now, before you tell me this is a frivolous experiment in question, let me just remind you that music is, in fact, a huge and massively important part of human culture. We spend billions of dollars on music every year, huge amounts of time, and it provides immense meaning to human life. So in fact, music is an important lens through which we can understand human cultural evolution. But Duncan Watts set out to explain this problem not with anecdotes or case studies, but by running a real-world experiment. Duncan Watts recruited tens of thousands to this real-world musical experiment. In this experiment, each of the users was given a song. They were asked to rate that song. And if they liked it, they would have an opportunity to download it. The song would then be passed off to another user. At the end of the experiment, the researchers would tabulate which of the songs were most popular. But there was an important wrinkle in this experiment, because the world was split into two different groups, social and non-social. And in the social world, and only in the social world, in addition to being given a song, users were also given social information about how prior users had rated the song and downloaded it. So what happened in this experiment? Well, in the non-social world, growth across song downloads was more or less the same. People seemed to like all the music about the same. But in the social world, something dramatically different happened. If a song received the initial cluster of high reviews and downloads, other users would suddenly rush to download it themselves. Before you knew it, you'd have a big hit. Even more interestingly, the attributes of the song and the initial reviewers of the song didn't seem to matter at all. Almost all of the songs could become a hit at one point. What mattered instead was where the song landed in the structure of the network. If it happened to land in a place in the network where the song would receive an initial cluster of high reviews, that initial cluster would form a snowball. And that snowball would suddenly turn into an avalanche. Watts' research has now been extended by many other social scientists to many other domains, including experiments involving Twitter, Facebook, and email. And what these social scientists have found over and over again is that in human social systems, change is simply different. And it's different in two vitally important ways. First, in the social world, change is fast, not slow. When an idea catches on, social influence will spread it across the entire system like wildfire. Second, in the social world, change is driven by networks, not individuals. If highly motivated people connect up with other highly motivated people, even once marginal ideas can suddenly become transcendent. Consider some personal examples. Social media. Those of us on Facebook have probably had the experience of having 40 or 50 of our friends share the same video. And it doesn't matter how stupid and ridiculous the video is, you're probably going to watch it too. Am I right? Think of a more serious example, like religion. If you're born in India, there's a good chance you'll become Hindu. If you're born in the United States, there's a good chance you'll become Christian. That has nothing to do with the intrinsic attributes of Indians or Americans, or the intrinsic attributes of Christianity or Hinduism. It has to do with the cultural networks those people happen to be born into. Duncan Watts and other network scientists use the metaphor of a forest fire in helping us understand social change. If you're trying to explain what causes forest fires, you wouldn't look to the qualities of that first spark that caused the fire. You wouldn't say, it must have been that spark was just different from all the other sparks in the forest. Similarly, you would not say, it was the first tree. That tree was just a special tree that was different than all the rest. No. Any ecologist will tell you what causes forest fires is the structure of the ecosystem. And in particular, whether they're dense clusters of highly flammable underbrush, kindling, connected up with other dense clusters of highly flammable underbrush. If the kindling is flammable enough and connected enough, any spark in any tree can cause a raging blaze. So what's the upshot? Well, conventional wisdom in progressive politics is that we should focus on changing individuals, and especially individual consumer behaviors. But in fact, the best network science shows us that we have to create activists, not consumers. We have to extend our influence beyond the individual in front of us to broader networks of change. Second, it says that we have to connect, not disperse. It is only by connecting into networks of actives that people can stay empowered over the long term. Third and finally, we have to inspire and not just educate. We have to motivate people to extend their influence beyond their personal behaviors to the community around them. The civil rights movement in the United States was one example of a forest fire. Change happened quickly. The first sit-in occurred in 1960. 70,000 people were doing the same by 1964. And change happened because dense networks of activists, coalitions like SNCC, connected up with other dense networks of activism to light a social fire that ultimately set the entire nation ablaze. So let's move on to the second assumption. We're often told that we have to change how people in corporations behave, not how they think. Behavior, after all, is what causes harm to human beings, the environment, and animals, right? So is it a behavior that we need to change? But again, there's just one problem with this theory. It's wrong. In fact, a revolution has swept across social science over the past 30 years. It's called the cognitive revolution, and across many different disciplines, economics, sociology, political science, and psychology, scholars now believe that in human beings, beliefs drive behavior. Let's look at one concrete example. Antebellum slavery, pre-Civil War slavery. You might ask the question, was pre-Civil War slavery brought down by mass behavioral change, shifting economics that drove slaveholders to change their individual decisions? Well, this is in fact the conventional wisdom among historians until the 1970s. Historians believed that slaveholders were giving up their slaves one by one because slavery was becoming less and less profitable. There was a shift in the economy towards more high-skilled manufacturing labor. They believed that slaves simply would not work as hard. After all, they were slaves. They had no incentive or motivation to work hard or learn new skills. It's a wonderful story. The problem is that data simply doesn't bear it out. And in fact, one of the most distinguished economists of the past 100 years, Nobel laureate Robert Fogel, went back to the data, looked through reams of historical documents and evidence, and when he found that slavery, in fact, was 72% more productive than free labor, that it was twice as profitable as comparable investments, and that it was key to the economic development of not just the South, but the Midwest and North as well, right up into the 1850s and 1860s when it was abolished. Wait, but if it wasn't changing behavior in economics that drove antebellum slavery to its grave, what was it? Again, Fogel looked to the data, and here's his answer, and I quote, "There is such a thing as morality, and morality is greater or higher than economics." Fogel went through reams of historical documents and found that instead of declining productivity and profitability, slavery was ending because of a massively growing political movement. It was called the anti-slavery movement, and in a mere 6 years, from 1832 to 1838, the Anti-Slavery Society grew from a mere 4 chapters to 1,348. That is over 40,000% growth. And you can get a sense of the tone and tenor of this movement by reading the inaugural editorial of The Liberator, the pioneering anti-slavery journal by William Lloyd Garrison. And I quote you, "I'm aware that many object to the severity of my language, but is there not cause for severity? I will be as harsh as truth and as uncompromising as justice. I am in earnest. I will not equivocate. I will not excuse. I will not retreat a single inch. And I will be heard." This is a reproduction of the original document. I just want to point out the "I will be heard" is in all caps. I think it's hilarious that William Lloyd Garrison was an early Facebook loudmouth, but a very effective one. So he was a Facebook loudmouth, but he was effective at it. Robert Fogel's research has now been extended far beyond the domain of anti-slavery to general principles of social change. In fact, another Nobel Prize winner, Douglas North, has studied dozens of countries throughout history, quantitatively, looked through reams of evidence and historical documents, and found this, and I quote, "It is essential to change both the institutions and the belief systems for successful reform, since it is the mental models of the actors that will shape choices." In short, if we want to change human beings' behavior, we have to change the way they collectively think. We have to change social norms, culture, and ideology. We have to make people see, instead of steak, the body of an innocent animal who did not want to die. So what's the upshot? Conventional wisdom in progressive politics is that we have to change behavior. But in fact, the cognitive revolution shows us that in human beings, we have to focus on beliefs, because in human beings, social beliefs drive behavior. Fogel and North's research, in turn, shows us that even if our primary goal seems economic, morality and politics remain central concerns. Remember, what drove antebellum slavery to its grave was morality, not economics. Those are Robert Fogel's words, not mine. And now we come to the third totem of progressive politics. We should always be nice. Not like those mean conservatives, right? We should be friendly and encouraging. We're told that we should never be angry, destructive, or critical, because that makes us seem crazy. People won't respond to the information we have to give them if they think we're antagonistic people. This is very similar to the behavior that Dobby engaged in the Harry Potter movies. Does everyone know Dobby, the house elf in the Harry Potter movies? No matter how terrible the injustices Dobby faced, no matter how cruelly he was mistreated by his masters, Dobby always had a smile on his face. In many ways, this is similar to the conventional wisdom in progressive politics. We're told that we have to fit in with people, that we shouldn't be so angry. We should always be uncritical of those around us, because we have to give people information and hope they'll change with the information they receive. But our goal as activists is not to be popular or to fit in. Our goal is to be effective. And to understand if emulating Dobby is right, we have to look to the best scholarship on playing nice. And again, there's just one problem. The conventional wisdom is wrong. In fact, the best scholarship tells us that negative emotions and disruption have been instrumental to every movement for social change. Let's consider anger. The man who literally wrote the book on social movements, he wrote the handbook on social movements and is the editor of the handbook on social movements, Bert Kleinerman, a social psychologist, writes this about anger. And I quote, "It is not enough to assess that one is treated unfairly. It is also important to have an affective reaction, specifically anger, to translate that assessment into action." Kleinerman has quantitatively studied dozens of successful movements through history and shown that anger is, in fact, the most potent predictor of social justice activism. So the picture is kind of funny, but the sign actually makes a point. If you're mad enough, you will go out and make a sign. You might even do something more than that. More seriously, remember examples like the Arab Spring. Mohammad Bouazizi screamed out in rage as he set himself aflame. We have to create the same outrage for other progressive movements if we want to see the same success that the Arab Spring had. What a disruption. We're often told by the conventional wisdom in progressive politics that we have to fit in and be friendly. But let's look to perhaps the best scholar on the issue to see if fitting in actually works. Sidney Tarrow is a distinguished political scientist at Cornell University, has written multiple books on social movements. And in studying dozens of movements through history, here's what he has to say about disruption. And I quote, "Because disruption spreads uncertainty and gives weak actors leverage against powerful opponents, it is the strongest weapon of social movements. The progressive playbook tells us it's counterproductive. But Sidney Tarrow, the best scholar on the issue, tells us that it is our strongest weapon." And this is an example of that weapon at work. This is an image of the Greensboro Four, the first four students to perform a sit-in against segregation in North Carolina. The action they undertook was disruptive, it was illegal, and it caused a backlash, even among the black waitress who was serving them, who said to them, "Fellows like you make our race look bad." And again, within 4 years, 70,000 people were doing the same, and Jim Crow was finally on the retreat. How does disruption work? Well, Sidney Tarrow identifies three primary mechanisms. First, disruption provides evidence of determination on part of activists, inspires other activists to do the same because they see how determined the activists are. Second, it obstructs routine and forces attention to an issue that had previously been ignored. Third, and finally, it broadens the circle of debate beyond just a marginal part of the population to the public at large. An activist much better and braver than myself, better than I can. I quote here, "Nonviolent direct action seeks to create such a crisis and fosters such a tension that a community which has constantly refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue. We have to do the same for animals. We have to do the same for the environment. We have to force our society to confront the issue. Finally, what of criticism? So often we're told we have to sugarcoat the truth, to back down from direct criticism because people will be turned off if we attack them. But again, we should look to the best scholarship on the issue to see if playing nice actually works. And in fact, what we find once again is the opposite. Gene Ensminger is a pioneering experimental anthropologist whose work has been published in Science and other top scientific journals. And one of her primary areas of research is understanding how social norms evolve and change. In a series of groundbreaking experiments across cultures throughout the world, Ensminger has shown that social norms change precisely because of direct confrontation. In fact, a huge part of what has made historical social justice movements successful is the fact that they've empowered activists to speak truth to power, to put homophobes, racists, and sexists on the defense. The conventional wisdom, then, is telling us to be weak, evasive, and deferential. What the animals need is for us to be strong. So what's the upshot? Well, the conventional wisdom in progressive politics is that we have to play nice, not be like those mean conservatives who are mean and grumpy. But in fact, the best scholarship shows us that we have to harness emotions, including negative emotions, to powerful effect for social change. We have to use anger to inspire activism, disruption to provoke the public, and confrontation to reshape social norms. We should do so strategically and with humility, but human emotions, including the negative emotions, have been instrumental to every movement for change. So let's sum up. What does the best scholarship actually say? First and most important, it says that we absolutely have to affect systems, not just individual consumers, because systems ultimately drive even individual change. And to change those systems, we have to inspire networks of activism, not just passive consumers and supporters. We have to motivate those networks to take collective action for social justice. Remember the metaphor of the forest fire. If the kindling is not flammable enough or connected enough, every individual spark and flame will just burn out and disappear. Second, social science shows us that we have to affect ideas, and especially social normative ideas and collective ideas, and not just behaviors. The cognitive revolution shows us that in human beings, beliefs drive behavior. Fogel and North's research in turn shows us that even if our goal seems economic, morality and politics remain central concerns. Remember, antebellum slavery was brought down by morality, not economics. Robert Fogel's words. Third and finally, emotions. We simply have to harness the powerful, effective emotions, including the negative emotions, to effect real and permanent social change. We have to use anger to inspire activists, disruption to provoke the public, and confrontation to reshape social norms. Remember, the Arab Spring was lit by a flame of outrage. Not just friendly behavioral intervention, but outrage. We have to create the same outrage for animal rights and other progressive causes if we want to have the same positive effects. So I've talked a little bit about a model for social change. My co-organizer will now talk about how DXE has tried to apply that model to the cause of animal rights.
All right, hi everyone. I'm Brian. I'm an organizer at DXE East Bay in California, where both Wayne and I are from. And I'm going to be talking about how DXE puts all of these ideas from social science into practice. So the structure of my component of the presentation is going to be fairly straightforward. Each one of the ideas that Wayne brought up has a practical analog on how we implement it. So for systems versus individuals, we connect communities with strong bonds and grow a community of activists, not consumers, and work for systemic change, not individual change. For beliefs versus behavior, we target large companies that are using people's ethical intuitions about animals to sell their products. We also tell the animal story to upend people's mental model of meat and try to get them to reconsider meat as violence and not food. Finally, on taking a strong and confident versus a Dobby approach, we use nonviolent direct action to go into places where violence against animals is normalized. So we go inside of grocery stores, we go inside of restaurants, and we protest inside. This bold message inspires activists and shakes people's assumptions. Contrary to the common position in the animal rights movement that this antagonizes people and makes them not consider animal rights, instead it disrupts people's mental models and forces them to reconsider. Finally, we create controversy to interest press and the public at large so that animal liberation can reach the entire world. So first I'm going to be talking about robust networks. My points are that DXE focuses on creating activists because of the spillover effect. The idea that one activist may be able to inspire another activist, who in turn can inspire another activist, and create cascades of activism until, as Wayne said, the world is consumed with a wildfire of activism. And we can use these cascades to our advantage, because in doing that, we reach the same amount of people. We do the same amount of activism with less outreach. Think about, for example, consumer veganism. All of those leaflets, all of those cookies, just to get one person to go vegan, right? Rather than one person to go vegan and then get other people and more people to go vegan. Moreover, we connect with other activists to create strong bonds and overcome dispersal so that our action can translate to change in the system rather than just change in the individual. So, for example, if you're just one dude standing on the corner with a sign, you might reach one or two people, but you're not going to be able to change collective systems of thought that cause people to behave in the ways that they do. So by having a large global network, we can do that. So I first want to tell a story, and that's actually my story. Oops, sorry. So I'm actually probably the last person in this room who you'd think would become an animal rights activist. In high school, I had very few friends, not social at all. I would actually spend almost all of my time doing math. I was extremely obsessed. I still kind of am obsessed with math. I would prove theorems on my own. I would literally, one time, my chemistry teacher actually got very mad at me because I was, pretending to read the chemistry textbook in class, and I had a combinatorics textbook behind it. And she got so mad because I had done this over and over and over and over again. Anyways, so I was a very stereotypical math geek, and I was very timid. I mean, I think Wayne can attest to this. I still am a fairly timid person. But I had read Animal Liberation and had been vegan for years. But as a result of this timidness, and I had been bullied for many years as a small child, so I had always been very afraid to bring up questions that would make tension, would perhaps get some kind of antagonistic reaction from people. And I think maybe other people have felt similarly. So I was a very timid person, and I was hesitant to even bring up meatless Mondays with my friends and family. I mean, if I were to ever talk about animal rights, and this was very, very seldom, I'd say, oh, well, maybe every once in a while you can cut it out. It's good for the environment. It'll unclog your arteries. That'll be good for you. And ultimately, and I think many of you may have had this experience, I was met with ridicule from my friends and family. I was the kind of annoying, pandering vegan. So ultimately, this is a broken model because I was the ideal outcome of the consumer veganism model. I strictly adhered to not consuming animal products after watching videos and receiving leaflets. But ultimately, this wasn't working because I felt alone and scared, and I wasn't spreading the message. So we need a different model. Ultimately, by pure chance, I met some activists with Direct Action Everywhere and started, out of inspiration and support from the community, to start taking a stronger stance on the subject. So I would bring up speciesism with friends and family. I started to adopt the policy that I would not eat with anyone if they were going to be eating animals. And ultimately, I was going against the conventional wisdom of the modern animal rights movement. Doing these things is crazy. You'll be the crazy vegan. That's a term, right? But ultimately, it was extremely effective. So in my high school, I'd estimate maybe 50% of my friends went vegetarian after taking such an approach. And ultimately, I was able to convince Jens, who was my best buddy, who all we did was talk about math, and he's now doing graduate level work as an undergrad at at UC Berkeley, I was able to convince my friend Jens, who in many ways was even more reserved about the subject than me, to start getting involved in animal rights. And now he's extraordinarily passionate and is coming out to all sorts of demos. So I think this is a model of activism where we both empower individuals so that I don't feel alone anymore, and we cause them to create other activists. And this isn't an isolated incident. So I want to tell another story. This is Aishwarya in Chennai, India. She's an animal rights activist, and she, by chance, found some of our demos online. She watched some of our videos and said, "I'd really like to get involved. How can I help?" So we sent her some materials. These placards said, "It's not food, it's violence," and she started to try to convince some people in her local community to get involved, to try to come and protest KFC in a protest. It's not food, it's violence. Ultimately, she was met with complete ridicule from her friends and family. Even her husband made fun of her and said, "I will not support you in doing this." But she was so determined, so inspired by the network, that she said, "You know what? I'm going to go alone." And she brought these signs. She was walking on her way to KFC, and this totally random guy, like she had no idea who this guy was, is across the street, and looks at her and says, "You know what? It's not food, it's violence. You're right. I'm going to come with you and protest." So the first day of action, Aishwarya had 2 people protest inside of KFC. And if you watch the most recent video that she and her friends have put out, now there are several people who most recently are protesting inside of a Pizza Hut. So this is a model that both inspires individuals and also causes them to create other activists. And as a network, this is good for us because it's more efficient, practically speaking. We do more activism for less resources, time, and outreach. But we don't want to just counteract the lack of a spillover effect. We also want to counteract dispersal. So dispersal is bad in 2 ways. As I previously mentioned, as vegans, we often feel alone and afraid. And that's not a good thing because often we're unable to speak up. But for animals, it's also bad. Because without unity and collective action, we'll be unable to change the system of animal exploitation. Animal exploitation is such a large force in our society that will need a correspondingly large force to oppose it. So we can't get there if it's a vegan over here, a vegan over here, a vegan over here. We have to all join together. So how do we do that? DXE focuses on creating 2 kinds of bonds. First, local bonds for inspiring activism and getting people to speak up. And second, global bonds for creating system-wide change. So we want to create a local network where people feel empowered to speak up against violence. We don't want people to feel alone. We want to feel like that other people have their backs, that if they mess up, if other people are antagonistic with them, they'll still have friends who support them. So we encourage chapters to have a regular structure with community events, such as potlucks, movie nights, etc. These community events build friendships so that people can connect and people ultimately feel like they do have support. So this is a photo from an open meeting and then a potluck after a protest. We also, of course, make sure that this support structure in this community generates activism. We don't want to just build this network and then not use it. So we also have regular demonstrations, both monthly demonstrations outside of Chipotle as part of the It's Not Food, It's Violence campaign, but also kind of random protests confronting speciesism in different places. The other thing I want to note is that structure is very, very important. I mean, I think maybe we've had this experience, but it's much more difficult to get involved with a group if you don't really know what's going on, and they have a demo kind of every once in a while, and maybe there's a meeting, maybe there isn't. Having regular structure, whatever it is very important. For global bonds, we do a variety of different things. So we have monthly conference calls with activists all over the world to talk about strategy for our campaign. We have coordinated actions every month as part of the It's Not Food, It's Violence campaign. And as another example, we have an annual forum where we can all gather, activists all around the globe can gather in one place to do activism and also just to have fun. So this is a photo from the forum. We were playing kind of a stupid game where we would make letters with our bodies, and they won. But we also did important things afterwards. So we felt so inspired that we ended up going into the middle of San Francisco and blocking traffic for literally miles and miles. So obviously the support structure always translates into action. That's really important. This sense of unity, combined with a bold message, has empowered activists in 50 cities in 16 different countries all over the world to join together in the campaign, It's Not Food, It's Violence. So just highlighting some examples, please. Actually, like if you could just stand up and identify yourself, like people with DXE Chicago, Phoenix, Russia, Canada, Brazil, Australia, and Bolivia, and Portugal. All have participated in this campaign. We're all working together. So these are the kind of global bonds that I'm talking about. So to recap, in Activists versus Consumers, we ask people to join a campaign and not to go vegan. This allows us to get the spillover effect of activists inspiring other activists. This makes us more efficient because we can do more activism with less outreach. And this mass spillover effect is precisely what we need to create what Wayne was talking about, this wildfire of activism around the globe. For individuals versus systems, we promote a regular structure on a local and global level for community events like potlucks and protests to empower activists, and global community events like strategy discussions and a campaign to strengthen the network and to have large-scale effects on culture. So now I want to describe a little bit more about our campaign and how we're using ideas from Robert Fogel and other social scientists about beliefs and how they influence behavior, and how we're implementing these ideas in our campaign, It's Not Food, It's Violence, which ultimately is a campaign about changing normative ideas, changing the way that people see food, see meat, away from a resource, a slab of protein, to as Wayne said, the dismembered body of an individual who wanted to live. The points I'm going to make is that 1, humane meat is actually economically negligible. It's very small, but has a massive positive effect on the animal killing industry, since it manipulates people's sentiments and provides a comfortable framework for people who simultaneously want to care about them, but also would benefit from killing them. DXE disrupts the story by doing 2 things. 1, disrupting Chipotle's model by driving it to its bizarre conclusions. If you believe that animals should be treated well, then you shouldn't kill them at all. 2nd, by giving a different mental model, by bringing the model of the animals being murdered inside of the stores and trying to get people to understand the steak from the steak's perspective, from the perspective of the individual who was murdered to produce that slab of flesh. This forces humane meat off the table and animal liberation front and center. So the main target of the campaign, It's Not Food, It's Violence, is the idea of animal welfare and humane slaughter. But first we should ask, why even bother with a campaign like this? Jonathan Safran Foer, if you may know him, he's the best-selling author of Everything is Illuminated. He wrote Eating Animals. He had a team of researchers work on this issue, and they found that only 1% of all animal products would be considered by conventional standards humane. So why focus on the 1%? Think back to antebellum slavery. Ideas matter. Beliefs are more important than economics. And the idea perpetuated by animal ag of humanely killing animals is buying our movement. So many of you may know that big groups in animal rights defend large companies for their supposed animal welfare practices. Just a few months ago, an executive at one of the largest animal rights nonprofits said, quote unquote, that he wanted to hug the CEO of a company that kills over 100 million animals every year. But the perniciousness of this idea of humane slaughter extends beyond our own animal rights bubble. So this is a graph from Google Ngram. Google has an amazing service where you can actually track the prevalence of words in the entire English corpus back to like 1500. So you can actually look at the prevalence of the phrases animal rights and animal welfare. You can start, hundreds of years ago, but I think it's most relevant to start in 1970. And you check the prevalence of these words, and you see that animal welfare is growing steadily, while most recently animal rights has been on a decline. So the public is also being influenced by the idea of animal welfare, and it's becoming the conventional model with which people think about this issue. So if you've ever talked to people about veganism, if you've ever talked to people about animal rights, often they'll say, oh yeah, I really agree with you, animals should be treated well. but we can kill them humanely, or we can treat them humanely, right? I think some of you may have had this experience. Right? So this is the conventional model people are thinking with, and we have to disrupt that model. So how can we do that in a way that makes it concrete with people? Because talking about these abstract ideas doesn't necessarily ring true for, I don't think, anyone, not me in particular. So while the name of the campaign is It's Not Food, It's Violence, that means that we can target any company that serves animals as food. As you see, many other countries that don't have Chipotle, they protest Burger King or KFC, Pizza Hut, McDonald's. In the U.S., our specific target is Chipotle for its marketing practices. So as you can see here, this is Steve Ells in an interview where he says, quote unquote, "Our promise is to run our business, quote unquote, in a way that does not exploit animals," while he personally is making $50 million a year off of killing over 100 million animals. Chipotle has broken its promise. In fact, despite their marketing, they're no different, if not worse, than other fast food giants. So if you've seen any of the famous advertisements, Chipotle says that their animals live live happy lives on open pastures. But the truth is that they source from a wide variety of factory farms. The Cattle Network, which is a large, big ag industry publication, called out Chipotle on their lies, saying that, for example, they source from Harris Ranch. This is one of the biggest confined animal feeding operations in the state where Wayne and I live. If you ever drive by it, you can smell it from miles away, and you can only imagine what that's like for the lungs of the animals who have to live there. Aside from other terrible welfare concerns, you can see the kind of facility that they have to live in behind barbed wire. So Chipotle is trying desperately to cover up this lie. And its profits depend on it. So I've done a lot of research for the campaign, and if you look into their tax forms, they're obliged to say why, certain ways in which they make their money, because they're obliged to explain the process by which they're making money to their investors. And they say that they are dependent on a form of values integration. That is, their products are not just valuable because of the food that's inside them, but by the ideas that they sell. So when you buy a burrito at Chipotle, you don't just buy a steak or whatever. You feel good in some way. You feel as though you're supporting some kind of food revolution or something. All of these words that they use. So their business is very dependent on them spreading this lie of humane animal agriculture. As a specific example of this, what they did is, I think this was a few years ago, they relabeled their carnitas to be naturally raised, which means absolutely nothing in terms of animal welfare. After that, carnitas sales skyrocketed over 100%, and they were able to raise their prices. So they're lying to the public, and they're making money off of it. And they also publish all of these materials saying, we tell the animal story. They show these images of baby pigs on farms, or in some bizarre way, they say, we treat them like animals. And despite this attempt, the company's dishonesty always shines through. So at two separate Cultivate festivals that we've disrupted, both of their public representatives have mocked animal welfare in response. At one of them, Nate Appleman, the chief chef at Chipotle, said after our protest, "We're mixing the chicken and the pork. I love all animals the same, so I'm going to eat them both." At this year's Cultivate Festival, their keynote chef, Graham Elliott, who's actually from Chicago, you may know about him, he's kind of behind here making this funny face with knives, came out onto the stage to the Smiths song, "Meat is Murder," intended to mock the suffering of animals, and then joked about foie gras, which is, as you may know, produced by shoving the tube down throats of geese and force-feeding them until their livers are terribly engorged. So I think that these two examples should make it clear that when public representatives of Chipotle are mocking animal welfare, their care for animals does not extend far beyond their bloated pockets. So how do we respond to this? First, DXE disrupts by holding the company accountable to what it preaches. We take the language, images, and other marketing tools that Chipotle uses and driving them to their logical conclusion. If you care about animals, you should not murder them. So here, you may see they have these Cultivate festivals where they put in lots of money to convince the public that they're cultivating a better world. Some of our graphic designers have changed it cultivate a violent world. But we seek not only to disrupt the narrative that they're telling. So if you think back to part of Wayne's presentation, Nobel laureate Douglas North said that it is the mental models of the actors that will shape choices, right? So we have to discredit the current mental model that they have of killing animals, that it's somehow humane. But we also have to replace it with a different one that truly tells the animal stories. So we do this in two different ways. The first being positive stories of animals being happy and free from harm that allows humans to understand the animal's personhood and their desire for freedom. So, for example, we have a variety of videos that come out where we have voiceovers of animals at sanctuaries telling their stories of escaping from abusive situations. So this is Panda Bob, and we have a video about him called Someone Not Something. It's a very good video if you want to check it out. It's like a minute long. We have postcards at protests that have animal stories on them. And we also have banners that don't portray animals in kind of disgraceful situations of violence, but portray them in majestic poses, saying, "I want to live." But we also have to acknowledge that most of the time, animals' lives do not end up like this. Most of the time, they're murdered for food. So we also try to bring the animal's perspective to the public by bringing their voices inside of the store. So at our most recent Days of Action, what we've actually done is we've had small speakers with audio recordings of animals being hurt by companies like Chipotle. And we've brought them inside of the store to try to disrupt and subvert their humane marketing by actually telling the animal story. So for example, some of the audio included a mother cow wailing for her baby son who had been taken away by the dairy industry, a baby pig who was having his genitals mutilated, and a chicken crying in terror before being slaughtered. So by doing this, people are mentally jarred from the Orwellian Chipotle marketing and consider meat from the animal's perspective. So to recap, companies like Chipotle manipulate consumers into buying 99% factory farming meat for the 1% lie, and ultimately is manipulating their pro-animal sentiments into buying their products. So we need to provide a different mental model. First, by busting the humane myth through disruptions and different kinds of materials, and provide an alternate model that gets people inside of the heads of the animals who are hurt for food. So this happens in both positive and negative ways. Last, I want to finish off the talk by talking about our more general model, which is nonviolent direct action, in the context of Wayne's portion, which talked about playing Dobby. So I'm going to illustrate its efficacy through a few short examples. But first we have to define nonviolent direct action. And this is a term that is hotly debated in academia, and it's been debated for a long time within various social justice movements. I mean, obviously this is not prescriptive, but I think a good definition would be that direct action is confronting systems of oppression rather than accommodating them. So, for example, working with people who kill animals to make the killing process more efficient or to kill less animals, it would not be direct action because it is accommodating that violence and working with that system of oppression rather than working outside of it to confront it. So, taking this approach does not have to be mean or negative or angry, but it has to be done honestly and with confidence. So earlier in the presentation, Wayne identified 3 mechanisms for the efficacy of nonviolent direct action, and I want to go through each one of them. So the first mechanism of efficacy of direct action is evidence of determination. So by seeing others be so determined and so inspired that you are inspired to take similar bold action. So this was illustrated, for example, in the story with Aishwarya. This man saw this woman so determined that he was able to disrupt his daily routine and go and protest inside of a KFC. I personally have felt this. This is a photo from actually the first protest I ever went to. This was before we had a campaign against Chipotle. We didn't have It's Not Food, It's Violence wasn't actually a thing. But we decided to disrupt a presentation of this film screening, of this film called American Meat. And it's all about how the meat industry is changing for the better. And it turns out, actually, that its main financial backer was Chipotle, which we didn't really think about at the time. So I was still very timid. I remember at the beginning of this protest, we kind of sat down in the seats, and I remember Wayne was trying to talk to me, and I was reading some book, and I was kind of so I just I kept reading this book. But eventually, what happened is at the end, the plan was to disrupt the Q&A and to bring the animal stories there. So I was not actually participating in the direct disruption. I was only filming the demo. And what happened was the demo started by Wayne getting up and holding a picture of his baby girl, who's a dog, Lisa, and saying, well, if you're going to murder these cows, why wouldn't you murder Lisa? Really, what's the difference? And we had all different kinds of activists pop up from the crowd and come down onto the stage with different photos and stories of animals that they cared about at home. I was terrified. You have no idea. I was shaking in my seat. I was sweating. I had this little camera. I don't think the video is very good because it's going like this. And ultimately, the protest didn't go that well. I mean, afterwards, we left. And people were kind of bummed out. They were saying, oh, we could have done this better. But out of all the people, I was the only one who was like, that was awesome. That was so fantastic. Let's do it again. I was high-fiving everyone. So ultimately, by showing determination and inspiring others, you can create new activists, and you can get people who are timid and unwilling to even participate to actually help out and do activism. So that's one benefit of nonviolent direct action. The second benefit is by disrupting routine and forcing people to think about the issue in a different way. So let's enter Jude. Jude is probably one of the last people you'd think would be an animal rights activist. He actually is an ex-farmer. He used to kill animals. He also is a Chipotle customer. And in fact, he was a Chipotle customer during one of our demonstrations. So by conventional animal rights wisdom, we are disrupting his routine. We're probably making him angry. He's going to hate us. Right? Oh, and by the way, Wayne actually did accidentally elbow him in the face during the protest, just to mention. So, confronting someone during their meal, elbowing them in the face, challenging their lifestyle that they've had for their entire life, all things that might make you think, oh, this is not someone who would become an activist. False. He is in the line at Chipotle waiting to get a steak burrito. By his own accounts, this is his own story. And one by one, activists pop up in the store with photos of animals that they care about, saying, these animals are someone's, not something. People are yelling at us. People are literally lifting Wayne, trying to throw him out of the store. In the process, Wayne, again, elbows Jude in the face. And what Jude decides to do is he gets to the front of the counter. He decides instead to order a veggie burrito. He then looked us up later and has now, as you can see in this photo, gotten heavily involved. So contrary to mainstream animal rights wisdom, disrupting people's routines forces people out of the kind of rut that they live in. I mean, we all live in these kind of routines, these ruts that we always think about things in the same way, and forces people to step outside of that and think about it from a different perspective, and hopefully from the animal's perspective. And this is exactly what's happened with Jude. Finally, the last point that Wayne made about the efficacy of nonviolent direct action is by creating controversy, it draws attention from outside the animal rights bubble. So we carefully draft press releases and we choreograph demonstrations to try to invite the public to say, oh, really, what's going on here? So we've gotten local and national mainstream media coverage. This is obviously not all of the media coverage we've gotten. We've gotten a lot more, but these are two examples. So just a few months ago, there was an article on the very front page of Salon.com, which is a very big online kind of content sharing site, with a very strong message. Don't buy the Chipotle hype. There's no such thing as humane slaughter. This was shared, I think, over 1,000 times on Facebook. It was viewed tens of thousands of times. And it was on the front page for like a day. We've also gotten more local coverage in a variety of different cities who are participating in this campaign. So, for example, Wayne was able to write an op-ed in the Oakland Tribune, which was published very prominently on their front page. And this is very rare because most companies have been seduced by Chipotle's deceptive marketing and have been very supportive of, or sorry, not companies, newspapers. Well, I guess maybe there's a duality there. Anyways, sorry. So having the Oakland Tribune endorse a protest against Chipotle is a very big thing. To recap, nonviolent direct action is confronting rather than accommodating violence. We use a bold message and emotional spillover to inspire new activists. Disrupting the routine forces people to consider things from a different way. And finally, the provocative demonstrations invite people to ask what's going on. So to sum up the entire part of my component of the presentation, we have networks and systems. So we want to create activists, not necessarily to create vegans. Activists inspire other activists, who in turn inspire other activists, and ultimately can create a wildfire of activism across the country. For beliefs and behavior, we have to understand that most people in the United States care about animals. We are a nation of animal lovers. But we have to make sure that those sentiments are channeled in the right way, because big companies are taking those sentiments and channeling them into corporate profits. We have to disrupt that channel and channel them away towards animal liberation. We can do this by telling animal stories so that people view animals as not just resources, but as individuals who want to live just like us. Finally, we use nonviolent direct action by going inside stores where violence has become normal against animals. Grocery stores, restaurants, outside of lab facilities where they experiment upon animals, all of these places. So this controversy inspires activists and disrupts people's mental routines so that they are forced to think about the issue in a different way. And finally, with coordinated press, this brings animal liberation to the public at large. So this concludes this section of the presentation. But I just wanted to say, thank you so much for coming, and also that we really need your help. This campaign, in just a few months, has grown to 50 cities in 16 different countries, but we need every individual to contribute as much as they can, because each individual has a unique set of skills that we could really use for this campaign. So we're going to show a brief video, and afterwards I really hope that you can join us to protest. We're going to go to a few locations just a block or two away, and hopefully in the long run to join the campaign. It's not food, it's violence, and contribute in whatever way you can. So thank you so much.
We want this to be a discussion, but if you have any specific questions about the presentation, by all means, ask away.
Yeah, hello, my name is Deborah. I represent the Vegan Chicago Meetup Group along with Dave and Mauricio sitting in the back. I'd like to thank all of you for being here today and thank Brian and Wayne for their inspirational presentations. This event is being recorded. It will be available as a podcast on the Vegan Chicago Meetup Group website. When you came in, most of you, I believe, received one of these flyers, and if you came in a little bit late or happened to miss picking one up, there are a few of them down here, so please feel free to pick them up. Because this is being recorded, we want all of your questions and the answers to be available via the podcast as well. So as you raise your hands, I'm going to be walking around and giving you the microphone, and I would like to request that all of you ask your questions using the microphone, and then Wayne and Brian will be responding accordingly.
And let me actually interrupt you quickly, Deborah, by just thanking you and Dave and the other folks at Vegan Chicago for sponsoring this event, helping to get so many people out, and also thanking Northwestern School of Law, which is actually, I used to work just upstairs as a faculty member here. So, and notwithstanding its conservative reputation, there are actually quite a few vegans on the faculty and some really great students who are working on behalf of animals at the Student Animal Legal Defense Fund, which is one of the groups that sponsored us today. So thank you to all those groups, too.
Okay, and we will get to everyone's questions, so if I'm going to be running back and forth with the microphone. So if anyone has a question, please raise your hand, and then I'll come to you.
And one thing I'd actually suggest, if you have a very deep and detailed, long question that might take like a extended back and forth, we're going to be around afterwards. So by all means, reach out to us personally. We've sent an email to us. Our information is on the website. So we can have longer conversations after the talk. We want to make sure this is a continuing conversation, not just a flash in the pan proc. So.
Hi, thank you both for the presentation. I came in late, so if this was addressed, I apologize. But can you, as activists who may embark on these sort of in-store protests, can you discuss the legal ramifications of that in terms of law enforcement action and
So I guess I should take this one since I'm the lawyer. There are probably actually some people in the room who can better answer this question than me. So actually 2 seats next to you is Reed Lee, who's a member of the First Amendment Bar and has been defending animal rights activists over 10 years. So actually, I think I'd like Reed to answer this question. I can tell you about some of the legal consequences we face. I could just say factually, we've been doing this for the past 10 months on this campaign, have done over 100 disruptions just in the East Bay, and many groups across the country have done even more. And we haven't had any significant legal issues because basically our approach is, we're aggrieved customers. We're coming in. We have a message to deliver. It's open to the public. These aren't private spaces. And until they tell us to leave, we have a right to be there. And there have been some occasions where we did a dine in Los Angeles where 40 or 50 activists just collapsed on the ground to represent the violence and death that's embedded in animal agriculture. And the Chipotle didn't say anything to us, so we just stayed there for like 10 minutes. And we're like, oh, we're getting tired. Let's just go, because people were getting sick of lying on the ground on this dirty floor. We eventually left because we're like, okay, we're done. But it was astonishing, the reaction. After that protest, there was a gentleman in the store, the Sikh gentleman, who had been vegetarian himself and had always thought like, oh, I've been vegetarian since I was born in this country and I've never done anything about this. He was inspired to join us in the outside the store restaurant protest immediately afterwards. But maybe Reed, you can talk about the legal ramifications.
Yeah, I agree with what Wayne has said, particularly up to when you're asked to leave, and since you mentioned free expression. And since we're in Illinois, I'll just tell you that there are a few the First Amendment applies to, Congress, the United States, and to states. It doesn't apply to private organizations. It doesn't apply to families, doesn't apply to corporations, that sort of thing. A few states have used their state constitutional free speech protection. California was, at least at one time, one of them. It still may be. To apply free speech protections against certain corporations, certain private universities, things that look like government institutions. Illinois is not one of them. The case is People versus DeGuida, where that was the Illinois Supreme Court rejected that. So if you're on private property within a restaurant or something like that, you should know that when you're asked to leave, you're crossing the line between protected expression and civil disobedience. And, you have your understanding of that, but you should understand that that's where the line is. The sidewalk is likely a very different story. The public sidewalk outside the restaurant or the target of protest, if you're not blocking ingress and egress, the fact that your message is something that the restaurant beside the sidewalk doesn't like, doesn't stop your free speech rights. So that's basically the line. If you're inside on private property, the line between protected expression and civil disobedience is basically when they ask you to leave. Outside on the sidewalk or the public street, it's a very different story. Your rights are much more extensive.
And I would just add, like most lines, this line is a gray line, and we certainly take advantage of it. I mean, we don't have teleportation technology. We can't instantly go from being inside the store to outside of the store. So we generally take our time as we're leaving the store, and we haven't had any problems with that. And maybe more important than kind of the specific answer to that question is having good legal representation in all of our chapters. And there's a great organization called the National Lawyers Guild that Reed is a part of. I'm actually at the conference. This is one of the reasons I'm in Chicago. I'm speaking at the National Lawyers Guild conference on animal rights issues. One of the things we do that we didn't talk about is try and provide legal representation to all of our chapters. So if in the event that something does happen, they have all the tools and resources they need to contest the charges.
So related to that question, do you think how much more effective are you when you go inside a restaurant as demonstrating outside? Because I've seen both. You do both.
Often, I think these two ideas of protesting inside and outside are sometimes put in juxtaposition with each other. I don't have an effectiveness meter, so I don't really know. I think both have very positive effects. I think that kind of going inside the store, I think, disrupts people a little bit more and makes them think more. It also provides really good footage for some of the videos. I mean honestly, like a lot of the videos that we put out are very important to our outreach. Public protest is kind of an established thing, so sometimes that allows us to get in media more. Sometimes doing something that's not an established thing is very interesting for reporters. So, oh wow, all these like crazy vegans are going inside a restaurant. Like, why would they do that? So that can make a news story. There are positives and negatives to both. I think.
Just on the media coverage, I mean, one concern that a lot of people have about going inside is that, oh, you know, everyone's going to see you as crazy extremists. But I could say in 10 months on this campaign, we've gotten, you know, probably 50 news articles, radio interviews, various mainstream media articles about this campaign. We haven't had a single negative thing said about us. So I think, I mean, and part of the reason is because we maintain the nonviolent tone. I mean, we're here to confront a system of violence, not any particular individual, not to take power over anyone, just to show that we love animals so much that we want to put our own bodies in the places where they're being violated and show you that we care about them. And it's really hard for the press, or the government for that matter, to construe us as terrorists or extremists when we're coming at this from a perspective of love.
Hi. First, I want to say thank you very much for all the efforts that you're doing, many of you in this room. And I've been a vegan for about 1.5 years, and this is the first group that I've been to. My wife and I both became vegans about 1.5 years ago. I did it because I ate a lot of meat and processed food my whole life, and then I had a gallstone, like gallstones in my gallbladder, and I researched a lot about how to get rid of those, and it said everything, the only way is surgery, that you got to get your gallbladder taken out. So I didn't want to do that. So I researched, and I found this guy who wrote this book about a natural way of getting out gallstones. And I did it, and it worked. And all the gallstones came out. I did the practice once a month, and after a few months, they all went in the toilet. But, I mean, I could see them in there, and it was less and less and less and less. But that experience, I read all of his stuff, and it made me really believe in what he's saying. And he said that the biggest reason for those is animal protein. And so I did a lot of research about how unhealthy animal protein is on our body. And I read books from T. Colin Campbell in a China study, and Caldwell Esselstyn. And so my reason for becoming vegan was purely health reasons, secondarily for the animal rights. I've always loved animals, but I really thought, like I think most people do, is that animals are here. And a lot of people in the video said animals, they might feel bad about eating the animals, but they feel like they need the protein. They need the animal protein. And my wife, on the other hand, I try to plead with her, this animal protein is so unhealthy, you shouldn't be eating this. It didn't get her to do it. But when she watched the videos, similar to what you've been displaying, that was what got her to become vegan. So it's different things for different people. I'm wondering how you're addressing that. Like when you go on these protests and people say, "Well, we need this." How are you letting them know effectively that they don't need this? It's not necessary.
Yeah. So thank you for that question. So the first thing to say about that is there are a lot of different groups with different messages in the vegan movement and the animal rights movement, and we have a particular message which is about animal liberation and the violence against animals. And if you look at the research on marketing or even effective litigation strategies, as a lawyer I can tell you, focused strategies and messaging are so important. So we don't take the shotgun approach to DXC. We're very narrowly, razor-sharp focused on animal violence and the horrible violence, the atrocities that are committed against animals. But there are other groups that are doing great work in other areas that we try to work together with in kind of an echo chamber, a broader echo chamber about animals, the environment, but all sorts of social justice issues that we definitely defer to on those issues. The one thing I'll say about talking about the health issues is that if you look at the research on recidivism, and 75% of the people, at least 75% of the people who go vegetarian end up going back to eating animals. And almost all those people go back to eating animals because of some alleged health reason. It seems to be that these people are primarily motivated by health reasons and are going back to eating animals for health reasons. And so I think if we're trying to build a movement that's robust over the long term, we need to think about why people stick around. Why people stick around in the vegan community, more importantly, why people stick around as activists. And I can tell you, I went vegan, and depending on how you measure my veganism, I cheated for the first couple of years. Sorry. I'm going to admit it, I did. I cheated for the first 2 years. But I started calling myself vegan in 1997. And almost all the vegans I meet now, 15, 16 years later, are no longer vegetarian and vegan. The ones who still are, guess what? Those are the activists. The people who were compelled to boycott these products, not out of some personal choice, not because they thought it was environmentally friendly or healthy, because they felt it was a moral obligation. They felt in their heart of hearts they just did not want to see animals hurt. So in terms of making a robust movement that survives at the long term, I think it's really important to focus on the ethical message. And the last thing I'd say is, if there's one point I think we want to try and take home, I mean, there's a lot of points. Activism is a very important point, but another point is just the social networks research and the difference between the individual level analysis and the systemic level analysis. I think it's very interesting and important for those who are doing kind of one-to-one outreach to talk about those particular arguments. From our perspective, what DXC is trying to do is build a broader network and structure for activism. Think about big ideas and communities, in legal systems eventually. I mean, ultimately, we want to create not just a culture for animal rights, but a legal system for animal rights. We want to abolish animal industry and make it a crime to hurt animals in the same way it's a crime to hurt dogs and cats, or human beings for that matter. And we can do that. But to do that, we have to create networks, not just individual vegans, but networks and collective bodies of people willing to make sacrifices for the movement. And that's kind of orthogonal to the question of how do we make an individual vegan. So.
And I support everything you're doing, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. But I'm just saying that I myself wasn't able to fully embrace this movement when I was under the preconceived notion that I need this thing. And once I realized that I don't need it and that it's actually unhealthy for me, then I could finally envision myself as one of those cows or one of those rabbits doing the testing on my eyes or these really terrible things. And I want to support everything you're doing. I want to go to this protest that you're doing, and I'm very excited about what you guys are doing. But I just want to make sure that we're letting people know that not only is it not food and it is violence, you don't even need it to. So it's not necessary to create violence when it's harming yourself in the process.
Yeah, and I think, as I said, I think there's a lot of complementary groups, and PCRM does a lot of work in this area. But from what our comparative advantage in this movement is movement building. That's kind of our project. So our hope is that other groups can complement what we're doing and supply whatever information that people need in terms of the health benefits or costs of being vegan for those individuals who need it.
I'd like to applaud you guys on your work. I think you guys are doing fantastic stuff. I've been a big proponent of nonviolent direct action for a long time. I believe in tactical diversity fully. I think every approach is needed, and so I'm behind you 100%. A question I had was with regard to you mentioned the 1 to 2% that you were able to get through the nice guy, leafleting and cookie sort of approach. But I was wondering if you had any stats or metrics for the efficacy of this approach, or if it's still too early for you to actually have any sort of data on that. I was just curious.
Okay, so yeah, as the data scientist in the group and the one who actually does all the measurement, I should probably answer this question. So I'm heavily interested in this as someone who used to be a data geek and still is a little bit of a data geek. And I think we absolutely do measure things, but our measures of progress are very different from conventional vegan or animal rights groups. What we're looking at first and foremost, we have 3 categories of objective that we measure. One is effects on the company. Their market capitalization, their growth, their revenue, how much negative press coverage they're getting. Another is effects on the public, how many eyeballs we've reached, how many vegetarians we've created, how many press articles we've had, and we measure these things. But the third and most important objective that so often is neglected in mainstream animal rights advocacy is movement building. Are you creating activists? Are new chapters springing up? Are people mobilized and inspired by the work that you're doing? And this is the important metric that we measure very carefully. We look at how many people are coming to each of our protests locally. We look at internationally, how many chapters are popping up, and how inspired these people are. We have subjective surveys. People don't like this very much, actually, but I'm the one who's a big fan of sending out surveys to people, and it does seem a little bit like consumer marketing, but I think it's important to get feedback. And frankly, when you have 50 cities participating, it's hard for us to individually reach out to every single activist in every one of these 50 cities and ask, how are we doing? It's a lot easier for us to send out a survey and just get a 0 to 5 rating on 6 different categories. How are we doing? And so we do all these things, and we're actually, one area where we do need more effort in is, I personally feel like I'd love to do some analysis of this data, but I'm too busy myself, and but we are collaborating with there's a Berkeley political scientist named David Brookman who's done really, really important work on mobilizing people to social change, who we've talked a little bit about trying to look at some of our data and just help us figure out what is it actually that's driving people to come out to protest. What can we change to make better? But if you have some skills in this area, I'd love to talk to you as well.
Hi, Wayne. Chicago misses you. Please come back. I just have 2 comments and then 2 questions. First comment is I think what you said about anger is totally right on. I think a lot of people dismiss anger and as a tool for inspiring social change, and I think people should reconsider that. I know personally, people harp on me about being angry about everything, and that. So, but I mean, I want to just tell a story. I told you the story the other night, but I want to tell everybody else the story. Like when I first moved to Chicago 9 years ago, actually, well, it was about 7 or 8 years ago when I met Wayne. I moved here. I was struggling with trying to be vegan. I was trying to. I was sort of meeting animal rights activists at the time, and I met Wayne and at someone's house, and my first impression of Wayne ever was he was ranting about some animal cruelty, like really ranting and really going, like getting loud and very like agitated. And I was like, who is this crazy guy ranting about animal cruelty? Like, this is insane. But I became that, and I think that's awesome, and I don't think everybody becomes that, but I think it's great when that happens, and it creates you inspire. Like I didn't always agree with you on your activism, but you definitely inspired me over the years in doing animal rights activism, doing animal rescue, and even applying your ideas into other activism that I do. So thank you for that. A comment for Brian about you mentioned when you were getting, in high school you were like a geek and a nerd and all that, and you said that, those aren't typically, you wouldn't typically think that kind of person becomes an animal rights activist, but I think that's exactly the sort of person that becomes an animal rights activist. We are the outcasts, not only in society, but we're the outcasts even within other social movements. Like, I'm involved in so many other social movements, and everybody who, in radical progressive activism doesn't give a damn about animal rights. They care about everything else, which is, we need to care about everything else too, but people don't care about animal rights. So, we need outcasts like you. Okay, 2 questions. One question, I've watched so many of your videos. I've filmed a couple of your demos, and I've witnessed like so much of the, obviously you're all nonviolent, but many of you have faced so much violence from either customers or employees of restaurants, Chipotle and other restaurants. So my first question is, how do you deal with that? How do you sort of deal not just in the moment, but even like in the aftermath within the community? And then the second question would be, I know, Wayne, you mentioned that you started, you're also part of Animal Liberationists of Color, and your group is committed to intersectionality. So could you talk a little bit more about that and how you connect animal rights with other forms of oppression?
So the violence question, I think maybe Brian, you should answer this one, since you're the one who, Brian got placed into a pain hold. I literally thought the cops were going to break his arm. You might have seen that picture at the Cultivate Festival. They grabbed him. This nonviolent protester slammed him on the ground and had 2 cops standing on his back, like smashing him into the ground with his face in the dirt. And I was terrified because that was like your graduation day, I think. And his parents told me, like, Brian is 18 years old. You wouldn't believe this by how mature he is, and he's brilliant, and he's an incredible speaker, as you saw. But his parents still have a lot of influence on his life, and they had called me earlier that day. They didn't know exactly what was going on, but they said, you better get Brian to our graduation, or we're not talking to you ever again. And I love his parents, so I was scared to death when I saw this happening. But anyways, Brian can tell you about that experience and kind of how the community responded to it and the nonviolence trainings we do before our protest.
I honestly think like how you deal with violence can vary a lot from person to person. I mean, what we try to do is obviously we try to make sure that we have legal counsel there to hopefully stop whatever is going on, but also to take note of what's ever going on. So you said like in the long run we can deal with that. Obviously, always filming at all demonstrations so that you have a video record of what's happening. We had an incident last year. It was, I think, the only incident in the Bay Area where we've actually faced legal trouble, where police were really harassing protesters, like kind of pushing them and like kind of grabbing them very tight, leaving bruises. And ultimately, one of the protesters asked for their badge number, and that's when they were all cited, after they asked for the badge number. But we got it on video. Wayne was able to basically have it. So, film everything. Legal counsel. terms of psychologically, varies from person to person. I remember Wayne freaking out. I didn't care that much. It was like, okay, like, I didn't think they were going to break my arm, like, so I wasn't really, like, whenever I see someone, like, because this happens a lot, people will yell at you. I remember I went on tour with Kelly, and she gave a speak out, and literally, she was holding the sign. This one woman just goes up to her and just shakes her like this. Quiet here, what are you doing? And she's screaming, right? But Kelly just kept a straight face. Because a lot of these violent reactions are just, that's what happens. I mean, we're talking about trying to get people to think in a different way, and that's what happens when your mental model is disrupted. It's just things get crazy, and you act crazy too. Really, I mean, this is so. If I can just give one little story, this is a very small demo. I don't even think it was part of the campaign, but we went into a Chipotle once, and we had these signs. This was before we started making the kind of nice glossy materials like we had just made with like marker, and we went inside and we were chanting, and then these two ladies over on this table start like clapping, just making fun, like singing like a children's rhyme or something, like just totally mocking whatever was going on, like really disrespectful. Like, I don't really get angry at anyone who kind of does this, but I was a little bit angry at them. And then immediately, this woman gets up and she's coming over to fill her soft drink cup, right? And I'm right there, I'm holding the sign, and she stops. And, you know what? I really respect what you guys are doing. I really respect what you guys are doing. Goes back to the table. It's like people just do weird stuff. So, I mean, you just kind of, that's just the nature of what's going on.
So there's another question about the group Animal Liberationists of Color that I am a part of. So the talk I gave at the National Lawyers Guild Conference just a couple days ago was about intersectionality in animals, and especially kind of the race dynamics of our movement. And, notwithstanding the fact that the vegetarian population in communities of color is actually higher than the white population, notwithstanding the fact that if you look internationally, I mean, Asia actually has more vegetarians than Europe and North America combined. I mean, there's a long history in Buddhist tradition, Hindu tradition, and Sikh tradition, and many different cultural traditions of nonviolence towards animals and vegetarianism. The mainstream public faces of the animal rights movement are almost universally white. So, Scott Plouse has done some research on this. He's a psychologist at, I forget what university, but it's some distinguished university. And he's found that anywhere from 95 to 97% of the public faces of this movement are white, and they tend to be disproportionately male as well. And this is a big problem, and it's a problem not just ethically, but it's a problem in terms of the pragmatic effect that we have on the world at large. Because if we don't represent the world, we can't change the world, right? And 37% of the people in this country are people of color, over a majority of people in California are people of color, and worldwide, 90% of the people of this world are people of color. We're not even minorities, we're majorities. And historically, the movement has not done a good enough job on racial diversity. And coming from the corporate world, I can say, we need to do at least as well as the Pepsis and the Coca-Colas of the world in terms of racial diversity, and we're not doing that. And so one of the things that DXE really emphasizes is highlighting the fact that this is a movement for everyone. Whatever country or creed, whatever religion or nationality, whether you're an immigrant or a citizen, this is a movement you can be a part of, because we believe, and we've been proven right in this, that there are people who love animals everywhere. It's the name of the group, Direct Action Everywhere. The other thing I want to point out, and this is moves us into a little more controversial territory, is that there's this brilliant article that a philosopher at Queen's University, Will Kimlicka, wrote recently, co-authored with his partner, Sue Donaldson. It's about the race dynamics of our campaigning. And if you look at the most intense, hostile, angry campaigns in the animal rights movement, they tend to be focused on foreign practices. The dog meat campaigns in China, the whale slaughter in Japan, killing dolphin or rhinos and elephants in Asia, or even dogfighting in the United States. I mean, dogfighting isn't something that upper middle class white folks do. It's something that those strange people in the ghettos are doing, right? And people will see Michael Vick in dogfighting, or we'll see a dog meat campaign and say like, oh, those people deserve to die, and yet their neighbors are eating animals and engaged in far more horrific abuse to animals in their everyday practices. So I think one of the things that we try to do with DXE and at ALOC, Animal Liberationists of Color, is let's move away. Let's just divert some of our, I'm not even saying we shouldn't do those campaigns, because sometimes those campaigns have value as gateways if they're done the right way, in a way that doesn't antagonize the community that you're trying to change. But let's divert some of our resources away from all the anti-foreigner campaigns, from the so-called low-hanging fruit. And let's target dominant practices by big multinational corporations that are run by the most powerful people in this world, white men. I mean, I love white men. I mean, some of my best friends are white men. Brian's a white man. So I'm not saying there aren't a lot of really amazing white men. There are, but it's just in terms of the optics, the storyline we're trying to tell. If we keep reinforcing the notion that animal rights is country club activism that white privileged people do on weekends because they don't have anything better to do with their time and their money, we're not. Forget about changing communities of color. We're not even going to change the other white people in this country because white people can perceive this as a movement that's privileged and silly and just is entitled. So it's so important. I'm really glad you answered that question, that we start changing this. And I think the three things we can do are acknowledge that gap in diversity, implement policies, and whether you want to call it affirmative action, I don't believe. I mean, affirmative action to me is a weird word. I think it's more just giving empowerment and actually engaging with people who you know are otherwise subject to implicit bias. And as a social scientist, I can tell you there's 50 years of history now, 50 years of solid research showing that when you look at someone who's different from you in some way, you immediately disengage. You think of them as someone who's a foreigner, who you can't talk to, you can't connect with. But the third thing we'd have to do is just not be so evil. You know, in terms of our campaigning, don't you know, if you see someone say like, I hope all the Chinese people in this world die, say like, oh, you know, there might have been a Chinese person who actually took that photograph to showcase what's actually happening at the dog meat festival in Yulin. And when you see someone saying like the Japanese are horrible barbaric culture, it might point out that, you know, they're actually Japanese activists fighting the whale slaughter too. You know, let's empower them instead of attacking the entire culture and the entire people. Realize that, you know, there are more vegetarians in Japan and Asia than there are in the United States. So let's empower those voices, not denigrate them.
First of all, I want to say that I love this model. It's very methodical and very logical, and it reminds me a lot of ice melting. Because there's this macroscopic view that you see, but it happens on an individual molecular basis. And there's a lot of physics theories behind this kind of change. One of them is not simply whether or not someone or an individual change, but it's also based on nearest neighbors and barriers. So, like the health model lowers the barrier to change because, hey, it's good for me. I mean, in your model, do you look at barriers to change and try to lower them so that it's easier for people to change? Or do you believe that this is just something that is so energetically favorable that everyone will eventually come around?
You know, one approach is to lower the activation energy for the reaction. The other is to increase the energy of all of the particles in the system. You know, as Wayne said, there are obviously different approaches in animal rights, and there are very good reasons why we should kind of maintain a fairly clear line between what we're doing and what other people are doing. I mean, activism just do activism, and like, you know, it doesn't really have a clear message. So like, you know, we're focusing on raising the energy of the individual particles, people's willingness to overcome these barriers. But there are obviously tons of other groups that are also seeking to lower the energy that those particles have to overcome. That, you know, to make being vegan easier, or, you know, to make animal rights, I think, you know, more comfortable and more amenable. The other thing is, I just would like to say, I think there's definitely some kind of perhaps animosity between these two crowds. You know, some people say, oh, you know, we're the more peaceful approach, and oh, you're the more confrontational approach, and, you know, that's, you know, we're not like you, we don't do this. There's some kind of separation. And what I'd say is that's, I think, almost exactly opposite from how it should be. I think that the kind of less confrontational approach complements the confrontational approach, and vice versa. I mean, very frequently, I will, like at the last demo, you know, instead of holding signs, I'll hand out leaflets and talk with people. And, you know, from a lot of experience, and piles of leaflets on the ground. And I think, you know, what the kind of confrontational approach does is it interests people. I mean, at the most recent demo, we were playing the sound about what's happening. So then I was able to more effectively reach them by having a conversation and handing out a leaflet. So, you know, I don't see these approaches as in opposition. In fact, I think it's the opposite. That last part wasn't really an answer to your question, but I wanted to say it.
So, just two things. One is, I think, if you look at the activism that's actually happening in the movement, and that has happened for most of the past 30 or 40 years, almost all the activism that's happening is on lowering the obstacles. Like the number of like vegan health folks and PCRM, and there's big money there because there's products to be sold. You know, there's money to be made in that market. And so, you know, I agree with Brian completely that there's complementarity between these strategies. But right now, within the animal rights movement especially, because of just I think, a failure of our own confidence in the integrity of our moral message and how powerful our moral message is. There are very few people doing what we're doing. So the bottleneck for our movement is, I think, what we're doing, which is why I'm part of DXE. The second thing I'd say is I personally, and I mean, I don't have compelling data to back this up, but I mean, if you look at kind of the anti-slavery movement, there was a discussion there historically and in terms of the activism of the day as to whether the most relevant bottleneck, the barrier for the movement, was lowering the cost of people adopting kind of non-slave behaviors or increasing the activation energy of the enthusiasm and the appeal of the idea of slave liberation, of ending slavery entirely. And notwithstanding the fact that, I mean, slavery was actually a huge part of the American economy. I mean, unlike animal agriculture. I mean, agriculture is like something like 1% of the American economy. Maybe half of that is animal agriculture. In terms of dollars and cents, this is actually a pretty small industry relative to slavery in the antebellum South, especially. I mean, the entire economy of the South basically ground to a halt after the Civil War. So, and yet, notwithstanding the fact that, to me, the costs and barriers are much lower for animal rights than for the movement against chattel slavery in the United States in the 19th century. There, the right strategy that ultimately succeeded in ending slavery was, as Robert Fogel himself said, morality, not politics. Let's create an energetic moral and political campaign and be confident that people actually are willing to make sacrifices. And the truth is, you know, as much as we like to deride human beings and say, like, oh, look at how bad all the humans are, they eat animals, they're racist, people, when they're compelled by social motivations and by the inspiration of the moment, can do really incredible things. I mean, people in certain religious communities will spend 30 years of their life saving up enough money to go on one trip. You know, in the Mormon community, people are mobilized by these community norms. They'll spend 2 or 3 years in these missions and dedicate their entire lives to living a drug-free lifestyle, which is, you know, hard in a lot of cities in this country, including Berkeley in California, where we're from. You know, I can't imagine what a Mormon would do in East Bay, California. But the point is, I think we often neglect the power of ideas, especially social ideas, in motivating human behavior. But we are social animals. As much as we'd like to think each of us as autonomous and separate and individualist, and, you know, coming from Eastern culture, I can tell you, like, the way I was brought up wasn't to think of myself as just this, you know, lonely individualist who's going to go out there and make change in the world. The way we think about things in Eastern culture is you're embedded in a community, and everything you achieve is a result of the community around you. And in everything you believe is a result of the community norms that evolve over time. And I think that's a neglected part of animal rights activism that we need to focus on more.
All right, I have a question. Well, I'm actually a student of acupuncture and herbs, so I've been exposed to the Eastern realm of things a lot, and that's another kind of like alternative or kind of like some pseudo-activist kind of field where vegans are very much disenfranchised, if you will. And as much as I like the approach of using activation energy and all this stuff that I tried to get away from in my academic life, a lot of times people just say, oh, you're blood deficient, you need blood, you need to eat meat. I mean, it's really that simple a lot of times. And I you know, you might be wondering, well, as a vegan, why the hell are you in that, you know, are you in that field? But the thing is, I want to be where liberty is not. You know, I want to be, you know, where I can actually have an effect and where I can actually be a thorn in someone's side. But my question is more about my background's in psych, and the stuff about social cognition and research and all that stuff is really interesting to me. My question is, why do you think there's such a discrepancy between people who identify as vegan or vegetarian, like based on surveys, up to 25 to 30% of Americans, based on when they're asked, you know, have you eaten animal flesh within the last 2 weeks, like 80% of them having done so. And how do you think that, you know, do you think celebrities are immune to that, or do you think that, like, organizations like PETA, you know, naming Anthony Kiedis of the Red Hot Chili Peppers, like, sexiest vegan of whatever year, a couple of years ago, and I would hug him if he were here right now. And he's not a strict vegan. He, you know, eats eggs and fish, but, you know, PETA went and ran with it. Do you think that that kind of thing is damaging to the overall movement, or do you think that latching on to people who are pretty much doing it but not quite there is effective?
So yeah. So there's a great story from, a lot of you probably know Malcolm Gladwell, right? He wrote Outliers, The Tipping Point, What the Dog Saw. And in one of his books, The Tipping Point, he talks about this theory called the law of the few. And the idea behind it is there's these handful of people, these great people who are super connected to all these other people. And if we can just change those few people, we can change the entire network. And it's a wonderful story. It sold, you know, millions and millions of books. And not to kind of copy the same mantra I was using in the talk, the only problem with it is that it's wrong. And that there's actually extensive social scientific research now showing that even social marketers aren't that interested in celebrity endorsements, because if all you can do is change that one person and affect their immediate network and the change stops there, then you're not going to get very far, right? So even a celebrity that has 5,000 connections, if we're trying to train 6 billion people on the planet and you can only reach those 5,000 people, you're not going anywhere. So what you really need to do is create networks, entire networks, where the change not only happens 1 degree of separation away, but 2 degrees of separation, 3 degrees of separation away. And not only that, where you create positive feedback loops, right? Where one person inspires another person, they inspire each other, and then you have this crazy, like you probably had an experience of a microphone going to a speaker system. I won't do it to everybody, but where there's this bouncing back and forth, and this is what happens in activist networks too. And so I think the problem with focusing too much on influential people, whether it's influential leaders in the movement or celebrities, is we're discounting the fact that all the great social movements in history have been grassroots, decentralized, widespread mobilizations of ordinary people. Is there a value in having certain figureheads and symbols? Probably. But what really drives social change, if you look at the social science and read folks like Duncan Watts or Nicholas Chrisakis at Harvard, is these wide networks of people.
I just want to thank you guys for everything that you've been doing. And we went to dinner the other night, and I was saying this feels like a breath of fresh air in a very stale room. Finally a window has opened, and there's this whole new approach, which is really based on what we've learned from successful old approaches. So I want to thank you for that, and I totally concur that there doesn't need to be this divide between this sort of activist or this sort of approach or whatever. These can absolutely be complementary. On that note, I just want to tell people that Chicago Vegan Mania is coming up October 11th. Was that graceful? But I also wanted to offer a DXAA complimentary table if you guys want one to recruit people.
Thank you so much. And that means an enormous amount, because Marla has been one of the most dedicated activists. Even from the time I started in Chicago, everyone knew Marla Rose and Earth Saved Chicago, and everyone was telling me, you got to meet Marla. All for good. And you should definitely check out Marla's blog, Vegan Feminist Agitator, which is an amazing blog. And the group Vegan Street does really, really cool memes that spread like wildfire and really kind of exploit some of the social dynamics we're talking about in terms of having catchy, simple, elegant messages that hopefully encourage people to spread, these messages very far. So I think these DXC Chicago folks, I hope, would be happy to take up that offer. And yeah.
Maybe you guys can have a sexiest vegan contest at the table. Just kidding.
I don't think that's going to happen.
Okay, my question is, when we were at dinner, I'm like totally name dropping because I'm like, exploiting the fact that I was at dinner with you guys. Lauren Gazzola, I'm probably
Gazzola, yeah.
Gazzola mentioned that at different events, there is the possibility of having at least a legal observer there, so that, because so often it feels like the police officers just pull stuff out of thin air and say, oh, no, you're not out there, and that sort of thing. To have someone there who can actually just, peacefully advise the activists. She mentioned that there is a free resource for that. Do you happen to remember what that is or how to get in touch with them?
Yeah, so the National Lawyers Guild has these protest committees, and certainly I think almost all, Reedy might actually know better than this, but I know in San Francisco there's like an activism or a protest committee, and you can go on their website and actually say and request a legal observer. In San Francisco, you just fill in an online form and someone will show up. It's kind of amazing. And I actually don't know if Chicago has a similar. Okay, Minku, do you want to, maybe you can take so Minku can talk more about Chicago.
Yeah, I go to a lot of street demos in Chicago where people are openly confronting police brutality or just any other issue in police or in your face all the time. And there's NLG people there, and I'm in touch with one of the NLG people in Chicago, so I can put activists in touch with those guys. So for the next demo, come talk to me about it.
So NLG is the National Lawyers Guild.
The National Lawyers Guild, yeah. And one interesting thing about the National Lawyers Guild too is. This is the group, the legal organization that was the first legal organization in the country to admit people of color. They were at the forefront of women's rights, gay rights, environmental justice. And over the past couple of years, they've started having panels on animal rights. And I spoke on 2 of them in this conference, and the national conference is happening right now. I actually left the conference to come talk to all of you. And to me, this is a sign of the writing on the wall. If you look at the demographic transition, there's all these young people more and more interested in animals. You look at the most important progressive organizations in the world. The New York Times, a lot of the liberal columnists have been writing a lot about animals recently. Frank Bruni, Nicholas Kristof, these people have written really compelling articles about how, is this really that different from what we were doing to human beings? And we still do to human beings, unfortunately, in a lot of contexts. But the ideology seems so similar in so many ways to the ideology that we use to oppress, for example, people of color. And I think that's a sign of progress. But one thing I wanted to add is while there are some risks to our model protests, the point that Reed and I were making is really important, which is that we're allowed in these places. One of the reasons we picked Chipotle as a target and picked these big publicly traded restaurant companies that are open to the public is we wanted to leverage the fact that they want to be perceived as welcoming to the public. And if you're going to be welcoming to the public, well, we've got a message you want to hear that we believe you should hear. And so we exploit that fact, the fact that especially companies like Chipotle, they want the world to believe that the vegans love them, that the animal rights activists love them. And so, I think they're going to be very reluctant to engage in any sort of legal challenge, even on like a store-by-store criminal level, but even more so, in terms of civil litigation and broader concerns of federal prosecutions. I think it's unlikely given Chipotle's incentives.
I'd like to thank you for being here. It's a presentation. It's been so great. So my question concerns the kind of demos where you walk into a Chipotle and you hold up, maybe coordinated, and you suddenly will hold up signs. I'm thinking of the average guy or woman who's eating there, who is typically clueless about these issues, and suddenly they see these signs that say it's not food, it's violence, violence not food. They may not appreciate immediately what the context for that is. So do you have the opportunity to do some education at the same time while you've got their attention?
Directly, yes. Often at many of the demonstrations, we have hand them out inside. Often what we'll do is we'll disrupt inside the store, no leaflets there. Outside we have a public protest, and then there are lots of people with leaflets there, talking to people, having conversations.
So we actually, and we often actually do give out information inside of the stores too. So we have these little postcards.
Okay, I'm sorry. The other thing is I've actually had this concern too. It's not food, it's violence. This is very broad terms. What about like the migrant workers who they're exploiting to make the tomatoes or whatever? No, really, and these are other issues too. But as Wayne has made clear, most of our focus is on animals. So we want to make sure that people are thinking about animals when we're protesting that way. And, more recently, we've definitely done a better job of contextualizing that. So usually at all of these protests, we'll have signs that say it's not food, it's violence, but we'll also have images of animals who are free or maybe who are trapped. More recently, we'll play animals' voices inside the store.
Okay, I just want to mention briefly for those of you who may not be aware, DXE has a Facebook page. So if you're on Facebook and you're not connected to DXE, you can like the page, take a look at their past campaigns, and stay up to date with the good work that they're doing. Also, I know this piece of paper and pen has been floating around for individuals to put their email addresses on if they want to receive updates. I'm not sure if it made it around to everyone, but if not, I'll put it right up here, and before you leave, you can go ahead and sign it here.
Okay. I guess the one kind of loner question I have is, would you ever recommend any one person to start protesting on their own in a particular place? How dangerous is that?
One of our organizers, whose initiative was it? I think it was Kelly. Kelly and Priya, they started this initiative where they're doing their own disrupt speciesism actions, and they're going inside these stores. And just, 2 days ago, met Wayne. I did, one of my own. We went inside this Italian restaurant, and we carried in an "It's not food, it's violence" sign. And it was a pretty good. We got a good reception, and a lot of people got really interested. So we're definitely encouraging more people to do that, because that's something that we really need in the animal rights movement.
I just wanted to say that I just actually did it a couple days ago at a Steak and Shake, and yeah, that's pretty much it.
The other question I have is, obviously kids are very easy to appeal to because they just adore animals. And what I've been finding is that when I try to appeal to children, I have 4 vegan children of my own, I get very angry parents approaching me. And I was just wondering what the legal issues are behind approaching children and giving them this message.
You know, that's a very interesting question. One of the things we sometimes debate about as a free speech issue is what would be the constitutionality of a law that said that no adult over a certain age may tell a child, not his or her own child, that there is no Santa Claus, for instance. You know, and that really turns out to be a very, very difficult constitutional problem. A lot of it has to do with the fact that the rights of children, the concept of the rights of children, is not very developed in this legal system. To the extent to which children themselves have a constitutional right to hear a message has not been developed at all, and it needs to be. We need to give very careful thought to that. Until that happens, you probably could be in some legal difficulty in trying to communicate to children over their parents' specific objection. But the general trend of free speech law is that until there are those specific objections to one-on-one contact, you are free to cast your message to the general audience, and if children are members of that general audience, the fact that some adults may not like the fact that they start thinking about something is not your problem.
So why don't we just end with that? I do want to emphasize that we are going to do a protest. We're probably going to do like a 10-minute break, and we're going to try and go show people the process that we go through in the East Bay in terms of organizing a protest. I'm actually going to ask Reed if he can stick around, maybe be a legal observer for us. It's going to be very quickly, probably just 45 minutes, half an hour. So if you can stick around, please do. I also want to mention, Sarah pointed out to me that even when we do one-person protests, we absolutely think it's vital to leverage social media. We live in a world where there's so much overstimulation, but we do have some technology available to us that allows us to spread our message beyond the individual, so even when you're doing an individual action. So one of the beautiful things about the protest that Hugo did was I was lucky enough to be there and got to videotape it, and like hundreds of people like it and share it, and it allows us to spread our message in these cascading ways, the way Brian was describing. So, by all means, go and do those protests alone, but even better, find at least one person to videotape it, and so you can spread that message far beyond just the people you're talking to in the restaurant. So, well, thank you all so much. Those were such beautiful and powerful questions, such an incredible group of people. I'm so gratified to be here today. And as I said, talk amongst each other too. Come and talk to Marla or Hugo about Vegan Street in DXC Chicago. If you're in Houston, we have an organizer from Houston, Heather Graham. So if you're a Texan, come talk to her. And we'll probably kind of reconvene in about 10 minutes or so and talk about doing a demo. So I hope a lot of people can stick around and do a quick demo. And then we're going to be going to dinner at the Chicago Diner if you want to come with us. So please.